Welcome to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a resource for Christian leaders who want to increase the number of missionaries around the world. This podcast is a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. Visit us online at missionarymobilization.org. Now, here's your host, the founder and director of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention, David Jacob.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast. Our goal is to equip and encourage mobilizers and missions pastors from around the world. And we want to hear from you. We'd love to hear how you like the podcast, or if you've got any suggestions, perhaps on how we can improve it, or maybe you've got an idea for a show topic. Just drop us a note through our website, missionarymobilization.org. And please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify. I'd like to personally thank Assemblies of God World Missions, who helped sponsor our podcast today. As one of the largest mission-sending organizations in the world, their primary goal is to see the church established among all peoples everywhere. Whether you're interested in going short-term or long-term, you can check them out at agwm.org. Well, our topic for today is organic mentorship, and our guest is J.Taliaferro. In 1999, Jay moved to Peru to serve as a missionary. For 10 years, he worked with remote tribes in Peru, planting churches and training missionaries. In 2012, he moved with his family to East Africa. Most of their work is concentrated in Uganda and South Sudan. They started in Uganda working with a remote tribe and then shifted their focus to providing both spiritual and humanitarian aid for refugees coming out of Sudan, South Sudan, and Congo. His lifelong mission is to empower devoted disciples to become better men, fathers, and mentors, to expand and establish God's kingdom in their hearts, families, and among the nations, and to think deeply about the world around them and how they can impact it in the name of Jesus Christ. Jay is also the author of a new book, Letters to an Apprentice. Jay, great having you on the show today.
Thanks, Dave. I'm happy to be here, brother.
Awesome, man. Well, can you tell us a little bit about your story of how God called you into missions?
Yeah, I was around 14 or 15 years old, growing up in Texas. And we went to a church camp. It was a youth event. And it's a funny thing, like the pastor was preaching a normal youth message, and he used an illustration from a missionary. And in that moment, everything just kind of became very, very clear. And I don't remember anything else about that message. I don't remember what happened before it. I don't remember what happened after it. But that just gripped my heart. And I heard the Lord just saying to me, this is what I have for you to do. And I want you to dedicate the rest of your life to this. And it scared the pants off of me, because as a, 14-year-old kid, I thought, well, that means that I get on a boat and I never see my family again. I didn't have a context for it.
Right.
And, but I also knew that it was what God was telling me to do. There was no way to avoid that. And I had amazingly supportive parents who, as I sat with them, about 2 weeks later, I tried to kind of figure out how am I going to tell my parents that I'm going to get on a boat and leave and never come back, which obviously didn't happen. But in my mind, that's what it meant. And I sat with my mom and dad, and they began to listen to me as I shared with them how I felt God was calling me to be a missionary. And I remember my dad kind of looked up, heard what I had to say, and then after I finished, he just went back to what he was doing, and he said, son, we have known that for years. And I was like, well, it would have been nice if you would have told me, but it was really cool to see that my parents had seen me develop in my walk with Christ, and they saw it coming. The Lord had prepared them for that before the calling even was given to me. And I thought that was a really cool idea that, God is at work in their lives before he had even made the calling in my own. And I thought that's just how God works. He's such a master strategist when it comes to everything he does.
Absolutely. What a great story. That's incredible. Well, in your book, Letters to an Apprentice, you talk about the distinction between discipleship and mentorship. And that's where I'd kind of like to start today as we talk about some of the points in your book. And we'll get to organic mentorship in a minute. But before that, can you talk to us a little bit about this distinction that you make between discipleship and mentorship?
Sure. So discipleship is what most of us have encountered at church. We go to Sunday school or we have a discipleship group. And the main focus of our growth there is spiritual based. And so it's usually focused on studying a passage of scripture, a book of the Bible, something like that. And the difference between discipleship and mentorship would be that mentorship is a lot broader word. It includes life things like raising your children, relationships, how to function in a secular workplace. And it goes beyond just the spiritual things into life skills. And I've had both. I've had great disciplers in my life, but the ones that had the deepest impact on me were those who were mentors, who I could ask about, hey, I have to have a really hard discussion with one of my teammates. How would you recommend I go about doing that? Like, what counsel can you give me? Or, I have, an issue at home and I'm not sure how to discipline my children for something, that is maybe a little bit more complex, and being able to sit under them and let them talk to me about that. And they don't have to pull out a Bible. They're passing on biblical morality. They're passing on biblical principles, but it's not a Bible study. This is passing on life skills, basically. That's the distinction that I make there. Mm-hmm. Both are absolutely important and necessary, but
right,
they're different.
Yeah, we need both in our lives, don't we? So you talk about this concept of organic mentorship, and that phrase really intrigues me. How do you define that?
So the way that I define organic mentorship is a passing on of knowledge, passions, and lifestyles through relational means. And it has to be at least all three. And usually what we do is we have more of an organizational mentality. And whenever we pass on organizational mentorship, we just focus on passing on the knowledge. We don't deal with the passion or the lifestyle that goes along with it. And in regards to missions, you can't just pass on knowledge. You can't teach someone how to be a missionary by giving them a book. Like, you have to also pass on the passion that you have for the nations, the passion that God has for the lost. And it has to be palatable. Like, they have to be able to feel it and be inspired by it. And that's the difference. Like, organic mentorship makes you want to change. It makes you want to be like the person that's mentoring you. And they also pass on that lifestyle. What does it look like, to be a missionary in a foreign land? Like, teach me how to live that. And it doesn't just have to be for missionaries. It can be for anything. But, teaching people not just about the information and the knowledge, but also how to live this day to day. And the way that I describe it in the book is the difference between heirloom seeds and hybrid seeds. And hybrid seeds are the ones that you buy in the store, and you can go out and plant them, but you can't take those seeds and replant them because they don't have all of the DNA that's reproducible to make like a long line of tomato plants, for instance. But if you use heirloom seeds, these are seeds that came from plants. And that they can be dried out and planted again and again and again. And as that goes on, the DNA gets better and better and better. And it's the same type of thing. Whenever we're dealing with organic mentorship, you are passing on, through a relationship, you're passing on the things that your mentor taught you. You're passing them on to someone else, but you're also recognizing that 3 or 4 generations down the line, these things were taught to somebody, and it's continuing on. And so it's recognizing that heritage of faith that is continuing, and not just making it like a program where we bring people together and we give them a little bit of information and then we move on. Unfortunately, many of the organizations that I have seen or spoken with or worked with in the past, their idea of mentorship is more focused on passing on of knowledge. It's just a knowledge transfer. But in order to have a deep impact, specifically in the world of missions, I feel like that organic mentorship is the key.
And this is such an important message for we missions mobilizers as we endeavor to not just recruit for our organizations, but but to mobilize the next generation of missionaries around the world. So you've had a lot of mentors in your life and speaking into your life. Why is it important to have such a variety of mentors?
I'll just tell you a story that can illustrate this, I think. Working with the International Mission Board for many years, like our focus has mostly been on church planting. And that's kind of what we focus on. That's what we're good at. We do trainings and other things, but our main drive is church planting. Whenever I was in the jungle working as a young missionary, my mind was set on that as well. And all the people that were around me were also missionaries with the same organization, and they were focused on church planting. But I had a mentor who was from Wycliffe Bible Translators, and he recognized how quickly we were really focused on rapid reproduction. And he recognized that in our strategy and in what I was doing, and he began to ask me questions about, what language are you using, Jay? Like, if you're rapidly reproducing, are you sure that they're getting this understanding of what the gospel is? And suddenly I was like, well, I'm not, let me think through this, and it challenged what I was being told by other godly people. And so it was able to stretch me, and I had to come back to him and say, you're right. If we don't use a heart language, then they're not going to completely understand it, and we're going to slow down our reproduction. It may appear like it's reproducing on the outside, but if it can't sustain, then it won't work. And so this older couple spoke that into my life and helped me to say, listen, I need more than one perspective, because no one mission organization has it all together, and no single mentor can give you everything that you need. And so outside of Jesus himself, I need other people. I need people that are strong evangelists speaking into my life. I need people that are apostolic in their nature. I need all those different perspectives to help me to be better at what God's called me to do.
Absolutely. So important. And I think for missions mobilizers to, there are other people in the church that can speak into people's lives, right? That we are trying to mobilize. And so whether it's, the elder saint that is there for every service and is such a prayer warrior, or one of the pastors on staff, or a co-worker of yours, to be able to speak in these different voices is so crucial when we're mobilizing others. So how can mobilizers and missions pastors implement mentoring strategies in their ministries?
I think that there are many ways, and many of them I do address in the book. But one of the ways that I use that's most useful to me, and I really feel like would be a good match for mobilizers, is telling stories. Tell stories of their experiences. Mm-hmm. And most mobilizers have a background in missions, whether they served overseas previously or if they've gone on many short-term trips. And stories impact people. And that's really what changes us. And as I shared in my testimony, that illustration from a missionary is what opened my eyes to the nations whenever I was a young man. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, share stories constantly, things that you've experienced, things that God's done in your presence, and help people to be able to grasp the vision that he is moving. He is on the move, and he is actively working in the world around us. The news oftentimes tries to divert us and help us to see all the negative, and there are some terrible things happening, but we have to be reminded that God's on the move, and we have opportunity to participate with him in that movement, even if it's in a small way, and not only see God impact nations and countries and individuals, but also have him impact our life as a result of being in the presence while he's doing something magnificent. So once again, I just say, tell stories, 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 stories.
You know what? And the research supports that. I'm currently writing my PhD dissertation on how missionaries impact the mobilization of others. And so I've interviewed about 12 missionary candidates so far. and just asking them about their call story and how God called them. And I'm telling you, I haven't done all the analysis yet, but it seems to be a very high percentage of these missionary candidates that they say things like, a missionary came to my church, and I don't remember their name, and I can't tell you what they preached on, but they told this story, and that's what they remember, and God spoke to me through that. Time and time again, these missionary candidates are talking about missionaries telling them stories. And I teach Intro to Missions here at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School, and I have a time at the front of the class where we pray for an unreached people group. That day, student comes up and prays for the unreached people group, and then we have something that I call Story Time with Dave, which seems a little childish, but I just get up in front of the class and I tell a story from our experience or from someone else in missions history maybe, or one of my friends. And if I forget to do that, these students are like, whoa, they'll raise their hand and say, hey, you forgot the story. And so, we can teach them the lessons, and that's important. Missions education is one of the primary mobilizers to send people to the field. But you're right in that telling these stories is so impactful on people.
And Dave, it's also it's part of our Christian heritage. That's where the Bible came from. These things were passed on orally for hundreds, thousands of years. And telling the story is part of testifying to who God is and to his character and to his love for mankind. And so I feel like it's a continuation of our heritage as Christians. I love, we usually call the book of Acts, but, in one of my older Bibles is Acts of the Apostles. It's just stories of things that God did through his people. And so I feel like, once again, we're carrying on that Acts of the Apostles is still happening. We're still impacting the world around us, and those stories need to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. So for mobilizers and missions pastors to study, to read, and to research, to watch videos on how to be a good storyteller is really a great tool for your toolbox. So aside from some of these strategies, these mentoring strategies, how can we create the proper environment for mentorship?
I think a lot of it is just transparency. It's a lot of transparency and being real. As I shared with you earlier in our conversation before we went online, Dave, I spent a good part of my day today out in the refugee camps, and I have two young men that traveled with me. And we were driving for 2 hours out there, and we were 2 hours driving back, and it was full of conversation and real conversation, struggles that I've had on the mission field. And I feel like that people need to be able to hear not just the great, grandiose stories, but also the stories of struggle, because it helps them have hope. If Jay struggled through this, and he's been a missionary for 20 years, I can do this too, and I can learn from him. But they need to have that reality. And I always tell other mentors, as I'm kind of coaching them through it, find very comfortable places to do it. Like, my most productive place of mentorship is in my pickup truck. Just someone sitting next to us. We may be listening to Johnny Cash on the radio. We're driving down these country roads, and we're telling stories, and they will ask a question that's completely, really deeply felt, and they feel like this is a comfortable place to ask that. I also tell people, constantly ask questions of those that you are mentoring. Ask them silly questions like, hey, what's your favorite music? What's your favorite movie? So that they are comfortable with that give and take. And whenever they want to ask a deep question, they can go deeper. I'm actually working on an interesting, new project right now, where with these same two young men, and I'm trying to start a podcast where we talk about Christian music and the albums that have impacted us personally. And so it's really funny because these guys are much younger than I am, and I pull out a Petra album, and they've never heard of Petra ever. But they listen to it, and they're like, there was really some good stuff in there. I've never heard of that. And as we're walking through that, that's part of our mentorship, me sharing the things that impacted me, and then they're sharing albums with me that have impacted them, and allowing us to have a good conversation without any kind of restrictions in a very comfortable environment.
So good. And I wonder how much of mentorship happens in vehicles, and I think that's why I love the phrase organic mentorship, because it it's something that happens naturally.
Exactly.
Where you're doing life on life with someone. I remember as a very young Christian being in a car with my youth pastor, and we were going to a hospital to visit another member in our youth group, and I was pretty shy and I didn't talk a whole lot. And I just remember my youth pastor saying, Dave, you're not a very good conversationalist. You need to work on having a conversation with someone. And I just thought, I'm a teenager, so this was kind of new. I actually needed to think about how to, be involved in a conversation and how to ask good questions. And so I think I just love that story of you guys driving 2 hours. So much ministry can take place as we do life on life with people and the younger generations. And so it's just incredible. Well, I want to get to some meat here and some more meat. I mean, this is all incredible, really good, valuable, insightful things that you're mentioning. But in chapter 8 of your book, you talk about how to be a good mentor. And you mentioned 11 different ways to be a good mentor. And I wonder if you would just take a few minutes to highlight a few of those and expound on those points.
Okay, I'm happy to do it. I've got the book here in front of me, and I'll just kind of skim through some of these and maybe expound on them a little bit. The first one in the list that I have here is personal follow-up. And I think that oftentimes what I see mentors do is they'll give platitudes, and they'll say, I'm praying for you with that, or, I support you in this. But the best mentors follow up. I have somebody that I've been mentoring for a while, and he came to me and said, I'm really struggling with spending quality time in God's Word. And he was ashamed that a missionary would have to tell another missionary that I'm struggling with that. But that's the reality of our life. And he had the courage to come to me.
Sure.
And so I said, okay, well, let's talk through this. We talked about it for a bit, and I said, okay, tomorrow morning, 6:30, my office. And we're going to do this until you rekindle this passion for God's Word. You and I are going to dig in together, and we're going to share with each other the things that God's speaking to us. And it was because I followed up. I didn't just say, I'll be praying for you about that and write a report. I said, no,
right.
Let's do this together. And I think that that's a really important one is the follow-up. Another one is practice clear and bold communication. Sometimes you have to say, as a mentor, you have to say things that are difficult. And it's very easy to say something in such a way that it's harmful and hurts their spiritual growth rather than enhances it. And so whenever I first started out, a lot of times what I would do is I was praying through what I was going to say in a hard conversation, is I would get out a pen and a paper and I would write it down. And I didn't want to have it so, memorized that it came off as fake. But at the same time, I did not want to misspeak and damage somebody that I cared about deeply. And so I would write it down and I would practice it. I would think through it. And then I would try to stick with basically, I wouldn't pull out a piece of paper, but I would just try to be very intentional about the words that I spoke, that they were bold, but they were dealing with an actual issue that needed to be addressed. Modeling. And I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Everybody kind of knows that. But it's very important that a mentor never ask an apprentice to do something that he either hasn't already done himself or he is not willing to do. And I find that generally the best case scenario is if you do it together for a while and get out there and don't just tell them, hey, go out and do something, but go out and do it with them and help them to see it. And then you can take a few steps back, and that allows them to also have that hope that I can do it. I've mentioned this a little bit before, but I think that we can address it a little bit more deeply now. Don't forget to tell stories of your failures. Sometimes those failure stories are the things that help missionaries to overcome. Every story doesn't have to be a victory. And, I have many stories, and I share, one of them in the book of a really dark and difficult time that happened because I messed up. And it was nobody else's fault but mine. And I debated whether to put that in the book because I'm like, I'm not sure I want to tell everybody about that. But if it allows people to grow and if people can learn from my mistakes, that's much more beneficial for the kingdom. And so it helps you to maintain the humility that a Christian mentor needs to have. by admitting that I also am saved by grace. And it's by the grace of God that I have reached this point. It's not by my own merit. It's not by my own strength or will. And I think that those are important things to teach young people. Okay, another one that's kind of hard. I'll stop with this one. Passionately attack your weaknesses. I always tell mentors that I work with, if I ask you at any point in time, what is the sin that you're battling right now in your life, that you're trying to cleanse yourself from and give over to the Lord, and it takes you more than 10 seconds to answer that question, then you need to spend some time with the Lord and reevaluate. And I feel like that we as mentors, we have to always be battling sin in our lives, taking it before the Lord and saying, Lord, if it's an attitude, if it's, a spirit of laziness, if it's, a lack of love for a specific person, I need to have that on the forefront of my mind so that I can constantly be battling that. And what happens in that is that if that is on the forefront of your mind, you're going to talk about it. And you're inevitably going to talk about it with the one that you're mentoring. And so they are able to witness what it looks like to work together with God in your sanctification. And the ultimate goal of mentorship is just that. It's sanctification. And it's the task of God to do that. But we co-labor together with him in that. And I think that all these kind of come together. That's part of transparency. That's part of saying, hey, listen, let me share with you my struggles, but also let me show you whenever I'm struggling with a sin in my life, let me show you how I fast through it. Let me show you what it looks like to pray through those things. Let me show you what it looks like to confess it. And so I think that's another form of modeling, but just actively attacking those sins in your life in full view of the apprentice is a very, very helpful thing.
Man, you're so right about that. Such great wisdom and insights. Missionaries are put on a pedestal so very often, and most believers sitting in our churches think, well, I could never do that. I could never be as spiritual as they are, right? And when we are transparent and when we are honest with our weaknesses and confessing our sin to one another, people say, oh, they're just like me. They're a normal human, and it makes this missions endeavor, the missionary ministry, a little more approachable. And a little more real, that says maybe, if God is calling me, maybe I could do that, because I don't have to be super spiritual in order for God to call me to the mission field. So such great stuff, Jay. Your book is called Letters to an Apprentice, A Culture of Mentorship. And if our listeners want to purchase your book or get in touch with you, can they do that through your website?
Yeah, they can buy the book through my website. There's a tab that says Letters to an Apprentice. You can contact me through the website. You can also buy the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and pretty much every other bookseller online.
Awesome. Well, before we go, I want to tell you about a new Intercultural Studies Master of Arts degree right here at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. This one-of-a-kind grad degree comes with an optional concentration in missions mobilization. And so you take classes such as Trends and Issues in Mobilization, Mobilization in Church Context, and missions coaching and mentoring, like what we've been talking about with Jay today. So if you want more information about that Master of Arts Intercultural Studies with an optional track in missions mobilization, just send us an email to hello@missionarymobilization.org, or you can visit our partner school, trinitybiblecollege.edu. Jay, it was awesome having you on the show today, man. Thanks so much for being with us.
It was my pleasure, brother. God bless you.
And God bless you too. And until next time, everyone, let's keep praying for more laborers to work in his harvest fields.
You've been listening to the Missionary Mobilization Podcast, a ministry of the Center for Missionary Mobilization and Retention at Trinity Bible College and Graduate School. You can access free resources online at missionarymobilization.org. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Missionary Mobilization. Thanks for listening.